Hi everyone, very welcome to this very impromptu live stream on the Mentor Now and the Captain Speaking channel. I hope, as always, that you're all doing absolutely fantastic. And with me today, I have my colleague and friend, Ben Watts. How are you doing, Ben?
Very well. Good evening, ladies and gents. Yeah, very impromptu, as you said. So let's talk about what we know so far.
Yeah. So I have been very clear with the fact that I don't want to share any type of speculation on this channel. So those of you who have been following this will recognize that. But it's also a fact that we are not hearing anything. We haven't heard anything from the official sources. And the latest information we have is that the interim report on the Air India Flight 171 accident is likely going to be released maybe on Friday. But given that we have got no information whatsoever so far, we don't really know what is going to be inside of that interim report either. Typically, an interim report tends to just outline what we know, right? It outlines the scenario, times, things like that, but it doesn't really go into why something is happening. It doesn't go into a proper analysis. And it's likely that we're going to get something similar. We might be surprised, but it's likely that we're not going to get much. So the reason that we're having this live stream today is because there are sources out there that are better than other sources.
Yeah.
And this morning, one of the main sources that we use on Mentor Now is called The Air Current. It's a publication which is very, very professionally done. Right, it's probably led by some of the best journalists, aviation journalists in the world. John Ostrower is one of them, and he released this that we can see on screen now early on this morning European time. And in it, he is writing that according to his sources, which again we have to emphasize that this is not official sources, but this is according to the Air Current, the investigation is homing in on something called the fuel switches. On the fuel control switches on the Boeing 787. So I have been pummeled. I don't know about you, Ben.
Yeah.
But throughout the day, I've been pummeled with people sending links to this. And then Reuters picked it up.
Yeah.
And some newspaper in Australia picked it up. And they started sending it to me saying like, okay, so what's your take on this? And because it's not official information, we can, of course, not say that this is 100% true. However, the fact that the Air Current is going out and writing something like this means that they have very credible sources inside, likely, of the investigation, or with privy to more information that we have anyway.
Yeah.
So I thought what we can do today is, obviously, we're not going to be speculating on why these fuel switches might be involved, but we can talk about the fuel switches in themselves and what they do.
Absolutely.
Right. So, Ben, if you want to take it away, maybe.
Yeah, for sure. So what we're seeing on screen here, ladies and gents, so fuel switches they're in the 787. They're called the fuel control switches. In the aircraft that we fly, they're called the engine start levers. They effectively do the same thing. And these are the switches that we use only a few times a day. In a long-haul aircraft will be twice a day. And what we do, these control the fuel and the ignition that goes into the engine to start them. And then when we move them down, it will do the opposite. So these are switches that are key to our operation on the ground. They allow us to start the engines. But once we've started these engines, these are switches that we do not touch until we've shut down at the other end, unless something non-normal has happened, in which case, which we'll talk about more in a moment. And as you can see in the photo here, on that photo there, we've got a couple of positions. And what we can actually do, Peter, we can do that now, actually, is we could jump in. I've got a simulator up and running here. So I can show you this in real time, and we can talk a little bit about the philosophy that we use when we're using these switches, because they are critical switches. Yeah. So what we could do is we jump into the sim now. So here we are. I've got a 787 sim up and running. So this is obviously the captain's view from the 787. Now we're on the runway here, engines running at this stage. But to show you, big picture, this is the view of the engine or the fuel control switches. They're down in the center pedestal here. These are the thrust levers, and there's one for each engine. Obviously, one for engine number one, the left engine, which is this one, and one for number two, which is this engine here. And there's two positions, two very simple positions. We've got run and cut off. Now, obviously, the engines are running at the moment, hence the position in run. Now, I've been asked, as you said, Pedro, I've been asked a lot of questions on this. People messaging me, going, how I know there's a focus on these fuel control switches. Is it something that can be accidentally knocked, or can they be moved by accident? And the answer from me is no. These are something that will require a deliberate action in order to be changed. And what we've got here is to actually move these switches. It's not like a light switch or maybe a normal switch where you can just toggle them on and off. To move this switch here, for example, from run to cutoff, it's a deliberate movement that we have to make. And on the ground, if we were, say we were on stand now, we've got the APU running, or ground power, so the electricity is being supplied not by the engines but by something else. We will come and shut down these engines, and it's a deliberate action. And to do that, we have to actually pull this switch up away from this center pedestal, because there's a little detent that you might be able to see just here that prevents it accidentally being knocked to cut off. And it's a real deliberate pull. It's not just a little bit. You couldn't just knock it and it would go to cut off. You've got to actually pull this out. And these are actually coincidentally the same switches that we have on the 737 MAX and newer 737NGs. As far as I understand it, Pedro, they're also the same as what we have on 777s, 74s.
Yeah, I mean the big difference from the old NG 737 NG that we used to run was that they were bigger switches and they weren't electronic. These ones are electronic. It is very, very important to understand, and I want to emphasize what you just said, Ben, is that these switches, they are only used to start the engines, shut the engines down, or to deal with certain very, very severe malfunctions, like an engine fire or an engine shutdown in flight, right? Yeah. Otherwise, you'd start the engine, they're on run in this case, and then once you are at the gate at your destination, that's when you move them. And when you move them, what you're doing is you're telling the aircraft that I want the engine to be shut down now.
Yes.
Right? That's what it is. It's an on-off button, essentially, of each engine. And like you said, to turn it off, pull it up, and then flick it down. Let's see.
There we go. So, I mean, it's difficult to kind of see the up movement in this sim here, but when you've got to actually kind of grab it with your finger and thumb and pull it up and then move it down. It's a very deliberate action. I can hear the engine now spooling down. You can kind of see engine number 2 here is spooling down, and the engine shut down. And as Peter said, this is an electrical switch, effectively. It controls something we called an EEC, which is an electronic engine control unit, which is the brains behind the engine, and it tells it what to do in a number of ways. But when we move it to cutoff, what it's effectively doing is closing fuel valves. So it's starving the engine of fuel. And without fuel, the engine just won't run. It's also depowering the engine igniters as well. So a bit like a car engine, you have spark plugs, kind of similar to that. They're just igniters that will ignite the fuel, and it means they're depowered as well. So thinking of the fire triangle where you need an ignition, you need heat, and you need something to burn, it's taking away those. So you've now got no fuel to burn, you've got nothing to ignite it, and obviously the fire in the engine goes out and the engine shuts down. And similarly, the opposite happens in reverse.
Yeah, and the important thing to point out, and the reason I brought up those old fuel switches on the NG, on the 737 NG, was that you could potentially start the engines with those ones and leave the start switches or the fuel levels outside of the detent.
Yes.
And if you did that and you were flying, they could vibrate to a point when they just went to the off position. That's not possible on electronic switches. Like, you have to put it into the detent for it to work. So for these engines to have been started, the fuel levels would have been in the run position, and in order for, if these switches were involved in the engines stopping to produce thrust, they would have needed to moved into the cutoff position. Right? And now, again, since we're dealing with information that is secondhand, effectively, we're not dealing with information that comes straight from the investigation. I'm not going to even go into why this would have happened, right? I'm going to leave that up to people. And once again, there's a high, or not high, but there is a possibility that when we do get the initial report, it will point to something else. But there is a couple of things in here that would point towards this, but that makes me think that the air current is maybe onto something, and that is we haven't seen any type of safety action being actioned so far.
Correct.
If the way that the investigation works is that they will of course get the flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder, and they will start to decipher that. And the flight data recorder will show exactly the position of these switches, for example.
Yeah.
They will show on, off, or run or cut off in this point.
Yeah.
They will show when it happened, how it happened. They will show the signals that have traveled over to the spar fuel valve to shut off the fuel. They will show everything. Yeah. And if there's something happening during the course of an investigation that indicates that there is a danger out here, there's a threat towards people that are traveling on, for example, 787s, the investigation will move very, very quickly, right? They will contact Boeing and see, who is it that was doing these engines again? It's a GENX, so it's General Electric, immediately, and say that, listen, we've found indications of this, do something. And then you would see these like emergency airworthiness directives go out.
Yep.
But we haven't seen anything, right? We've seen nothing whatsoever. And if the fuel switches are turned off, for whatever reason, by whoever, then that is not something that's wrong with the aircraft. And the aircraft is then working and operating as expected, which would mean that there would be no need for any type of safety action to take place.
Correct. And it also, I mean, something we spoke about in the original live stream when this was first presented to us, is that from the footage that you can see, one of the things we picked up on was that if the engines failed, if that was the cause, and bearing in mind at the time we didn't know that was the cause, but if the engines failed, it's most likely they failed almost instantaneously, almost at exactly the same time. Because if one failed and then another, you would see some form of visible yaw as one engine is producing thrust and the other one isn't. But the fact that that's very difficult to perceive, when you look at videos on YouTube of aircraft with engine failures, you'll see the aircraft yaw. There was none of that, which means that, again, this had to happen simultaneously with both engines.
Yeah, that's significant because in the air current article, they also pointed out that the 787 has a compensation program, a technical program, basically that the aircraft will itself feel that there is differential thrust being produced and will input rather to compensate for that, right?
Yeah,
and that makes sense, but the thing is that those systems are never instantaneous.
No.
Like you would always see one engine. If one engine fails, the aircraft would yaw, and then the system would come in and correct it.
Yeah.
Right. So it would keep the thrust. It would keep the track going, but you would definitely see something happening. But on every video that I have seen, you cannot see anything. It just goes and then it suddenly starts descending again. So like you said, that's the point that if we're talking about dual engine failures here, which, by the way, is like a single engine failure, a single engine flame out is extremely rare.
Yeah.
To have two engines flaming out on new engines on a new aircraft is beyond rare, and to have it happening at exactly the same time is astronomical. Like the risk of that happening from like a failure or something outside of control would be astronomical. I don't even know what the figures are, but I'm thinking billions of flight hours for that.
Oh yeah. And if we just jump back into the sim, if we can just jump back into the sim, actually, just to kind of show while we're here, because if I bring up the fuel schematic here on the lower DU, that you can actually see, as I've got engine 2 shut off, you can see. This is the engine that's running. You can see that the fuel valves are open, supplying the engine. It's green. I've moved the engine to cut off, and it's now closed those valves, which emphasizes what we said about how it starves the fuel. But you can also see, to prevent any kind of accidental knocking of these switches off, which again, it'd be very hard, I think, wouldn't it? But I mean, these are, like we said, it's a real deliberate action, particularly for both of them. But you can see that Boeing have installed these guards here, which would prevent things like your cuffs or your arm or anything kind of falling and knocking into these. Because when we're in flight, these are sacred switches as such. We would never touch one of these switches in flight unless there was some very serious reason as to why, which would normally be some form of engine malfunction, which would require a controlled engine shutdown, a single controlled engine shutdown, in which case it is a very, very strict methodical process that we take in order to shut the engine down. Because if we get that wrong, then you're shutting down a good engine and leaving the bad, which we've seen in the past.
Yeah, the Kegworth air disaster is probably the most known of those instances, and after that one and many others, we learned, from blood, sweat, and tears, that you have to be involving both pilots in any movement of these switches. So, if I give you an example, if we have, let's say that we take off and we have a severe engine damage.
Yeah.
Right. The fan stops for whatever reason. We get engine severe damage. Then what you do is you continue as pilot flying. You continue to control the aircraft. You put input rudder. In the case of 787, that's done more or less automatically for you. You continue to climb. You look for positive rate. When you have positive rate, you get the gear up, and then typically you wait to a minimum altitude, which is, on the 737 it's about 400 feet. So it might be different on different airlines and different aircraft. But about 400 feet, the pilot flying will then ask, state malfunction.
Correct. And the reason we do that is so that we prioritize flying the airplane first. What we don't want is pilots being head down, distracted, very close to the ground, trying to work out what's gone wrong. So we focus on flying exactly as Petter said. Once we're safely under control, above 400 feet in our particular case, state malfunction, and then pilot monitoring, who's not flying, will call what they see. So in this example, you would say it's engine number 2, the right engine. We might have an abnormal N1. M1, we might have a very high exhaust gas temperature. N2 and N3 might be different. The fuel flow might be strange. So it's abnormal, which is condition 1 of a severe damage. And we might feel airframe vibration. We can feel the aircraft shaking as this fan blade or whatever is damaged is shaking itself. So we go, okay, it's a severe damage, engine number 2, which pilot flying would look across and go, yeah, I confirmed. And they would call them for the appropriate ECAM actions, memory items, ICAS, whatever it would be in that particular aircraft. And then we can run through that, Peter, if you like. I can call it for you.
Yep, job. So I'll call it out then. Okay, I agree. I want the engine, fire, severe damage, and separation memory items.
Okay, so memory items, and this is, bearing in mind, this is just an example. This isn't specific for the 7.8. This is just an example we're using for the 7.3, but it'll be very, very similar. So I would say thrust lever, engine, let's say the engines are up like this. Thrust lever, engine number 2, confirm, close, and I would put my finger on it so Petter could look and make sure I've got the right one.
Yep, and I will look over, and since this is an engine and I am flying, and I'm pilot flying at this moment, I will put my hand and I say confirm.
Yeah, sorry, buddy. Yeah.
And then I will close it, because that's gonna, at least in the 737, that's gonna have an effect on the handling characteristics of the aircraft. So correct. I will close it. But the important point is that because this affects the thrust, we are now confirming, we're double checking before we move anything.
Yeah. So correct. So whoever's pilot flying will put their finger on there. If I'm pilot monitoring, obviously that I will watch, and Petter would say his finger's on there and go confirm. I would say yep, confirm, deliberately checking that it is the correct engine, and then Petter would say close, and he would bring that back gently and to close. So now that engine is back to idle, and then I would Should we carry on then, Petter, from there?
Yeah, continue.
So start lever, engine number or fuel control switch, engine number 2, confirm cutoff. And again,
and I will look over.
So it would be here.
Yeah.
And you can see that. And let's have a look at the fuel schematic as we do this. These are the spar valves and the engine fuel valves that you can see up here. They're in line, which means the fuel would be flowing. I would put my finger on there or hand on there now as pilot monitoring and say confirm. And this is where we would absolutely confirm, because this is the point of no return now.
Yeah, and now you can look over. We can look both at the engine instruments and in this case also the fuel schematic and see that, the left engine is the good one. The right engine is the one that we want to do something about. So yes, I confirm.
And then as I move this, have a look at these valves to cut off. These valves will close and they will stop the fuel. There you go. Cut off, and then we would come down, and we also have a fire switch down here, which would, when we pull this up, even though the engine's not on fire, what it does is it isolates the engine from, it isolates things like hydraulics, electrics, and so on. So we would say fire switch, engine number 2, confirm, pull. I'd put my hand on it, and Petter would confirm, and then I would pull that up, and because there's no fire, we would just leave it there. And whether the auto throttle stays engaged on the 7.8, I'm not sure. But if in the 7.3, we'd have disengaged the auto throttle first. Yeah. But it's a very, very, as you can see, a very, very methodical, well thought out process that isn't done hastily at all to make sure that this is done correctly.
And that's super important to point out here, because like whatever happened, if the fuel switches were involved in any way, shape or form, there shouldn't have been any movement at that altitude. They were only at about 400 feet or so, right?
Yeah.
So at 400 feet, before the gears even being fully retracted, there should not be any movement of these fuel switches in any situation ever.
No.
Right. So
No.
that I just want to get that out there, that these fuel switches, if they were moved at that point, then that was an error of some sort.
Yeah.
Now, questions obviously that comes up, people would be asking, why isn't there a guard on top of these? Why isn't there, another step involved in before you move this? Because essentially this is just one switch that can shut off an engine, right? It seems like something that you should have. But I think people need to understand that the way that an aircraft is built, especially a Boeing, I have to say, is that it assumes that the people that are in charge know what they're doing and that they're taking appropriate steps.
Yeah.
Right. So there are no safeguards for critical switches. There are a few on the overhead panel where you have these like guarded kind of between, like it is a bit of mesh almost that holds it, that because it's an action that cannot be reversed.
Correct.
Right. So whenever you have an action that can't be reversed, there is actually a little bit of a warning, like ooh, think. But on the ones that are to be used on a daily basis, which the fuel switches definitely are, you don't have that. The manufacturer is assuming that you're not going to be fuffing around with those if there's no point, if there's no reason for it.
No, and you and I, we've trained this for thousands of hours, haven't we, in sims, watching crews shut down engines for part of the training that we undertake. And it's grained in from day one, isn't it? How these switches are respected and how they're used. And you don't see crews just willy-nilly shutting off engines. It's just so far from what you would imagine as a pilot. It just doesn't happen.
No. And now I want to also, I see a lot of questions coming up, guys. We are going to be answering some questions soon, so don't worry. But I saw one just now. So like, why speculate? Maybe it'll come on Friday. I want to point out something here now that I think is super important. I have, throughout these last couple of weeks after the accident happened, pointed out that there is a vacuum out there. There's an information vacuum out there, and it's being filled by nefarious actors, by either people who are wildly speculating without any kind of basis about the causes, but maybe with good intentions, but also by these AI-generated interim reports. I've already seen people like, what about vapor lock? What about FADEC? What about a share that's moving? All of that comes from fake reports. Yeah. Right. All of those. Whenever you hear someone say vapor lock, it's because they've seen a fake report or fake. And whenever they say that a share was moving, that the pilot share was moving backwards, also fake report. So I am highly critical about the way that the information flow has happened here. And I think that in the age of AI that we're living now, and remember, AI will only get smarter. It will never be as stupid as it is today, right? So these fake reports that are coming out and are being shared by professionals, by the way, they're only going to get better and more believable as time goes by. So there needs to be a shift now, I think, from the authorities' point of view, right? And I know that this is shared by others in the industry as well. There needs to be a shift to more and quicker information sharing. Yeah. Right. And that could be, I mean, you and I know, Ben, that saying that you don't know something, it's also information.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
Going out and having a daily brief, basically, and saying that so far we've found the boxes, we're looking into them, we've sent them off to be read. But we have no more information right now. That is also official information, because that can stop these AI generated things that are being shared around. Yeah. So the reason that we are talking about this again, I mentioned this in the beginning, but some of you might have joined later, is because the Air Current, which released this article that has been spread now wildly over the world, is one of the most respected magazines out there. When it comes to any kind of publication around aviation, the Air Current, Leham News, and a few others, Seattle Times, are the ones that I would listen to. Those are the ones that my team and I go into and listen to when we pick up information about videos that we are creating, right? So I know that they will not publish anything that they don't have some kind of bearing for. right? But having said that, I am very clear here. We don't have any more information, right, than this. We have this from the air current, but there's still nothing coming out of the EAC, the Indian authorities. So the reason we are doing this live stream now is just to show you the technical information behind and the kind of procedures that we follow, right?
Yeah.
When we deal with this switch. It doesn't mean that it is this switch. It could come out on Friday that it's something completely different. But if you see this kind of this information now being spread from other sources around, at least now you know what these fuel switches do, right? So
Absolutely. And people can make their own, as you said, the vacuum is what's dangerous, because that just fuels conspiracy.
Yeah.
So, and as we know just from day-to-day flying, if we've got a big air traffic control delay and it's like an hour and a half long, we'll tell the passengers. But the worst thing we can do now is just sit there for an hour and a half up the front, twiddling our thumbs. We need to, even if every 15 minutes, 20 minutes, even if there's nothing to say, just a quick update, ladies and gents, look, we're still negotiating, we're trying to get a direct routing or whatever. Just keep people updated. And it's the same with this. And now by addressing this, hopefully everybody knows the facts. They know what these are, what they're not, and you can draw your own conclusions.
Yeah, exactly. And so we hope that this has been helpful. And we're going to take some questions now. Yeah. We'll see our helper, Navin, maybe has been able to pick up some questions. Otherwise, we'll just take them.
Yeah, so there's a couple here. So Super Duper Hilton, the question here. So assuming there was an issue with the fuel control switches, how does that explain the flaps being up? Also, I don't believe that would cause the rat to deploy. Where's the black box data? Okay, so there's a couple of things in there. First of all, I would say we don't know for sure the flaps are up. The images of the actual wreckage show the flaps are out. So there's nothing to say that the flaps were up. And the rat, as far as I know, would deploy.
Yeah.
The rat would deploy because all the rat looks at is, do I have AC power from the engines or a generator? And if the answer is no, it will deploy.
Yeah.
So
it knows that it is. It knows that it's airborne.
Yeah.
So it knows the ram air turbine will determine whether or not it's needed depending on phase of flight. So it will not deploy on the ground, obviously, when you shut down the engines, but it will deploy if the engines are shut down for whatever reason and the aircraft is still flying, because it will assume that pilots will still need hydraulics and electricity. So I will deploy. So even if the fuels, but I actually, in connection to that, I saw a comment earlier who said, well, can you not just flip them back up?
I saw that too. Just about to ask that.
Yeah. So what, I mean, yes, the answer is yes, you can. You can switch them back up again. Now, depending on how far the engine has rolled back already, it might or might not work, right? Yep. So the, once you let's say that you take off, you're up at cruise, for example, and for some reason the wrong fuel switch is moved, right? That will shut down the engine. If you put it back up again, that will open the spar fuel valve, just like you saw on the cockpit picture that we used before, and that will also activate the igniters. So since it's windmilling, hopefully it will just and restart again.
Yeah.
Right. But if it's gone back too far, it might need some time to do that.
Yeah, it very much depends on, like Petter mentioned, like a windmill. It needs a certain RPM of the engine to get the airflow traveling in the correct direction through the engine for the ignition to start properly. I mean, I had as a light, you may have seen it yourself. When I was an instructor years ago on light aircraft, I had students pull what we used to call the mixture control, which is effectively like a little light aircraft version of the fuel control. It just closes the fuel. And it's quite a common thing. It's right next to the throttle, and they would just pull that, and the engine would just cough and splutter to a death. And their look on their face is, one that they won't forget. But if you put the mixture back in again and open the fuel valve, the engine, because it's still spinning because of the windmill effect, it just sputters back to life, and all is well. But and it's a very similar thing with this.
Yeah. So someone actually had a really good question here. Said, could an electrical failure have closed the fuel valves? I mean, again, yeah. I mean, the air current in their article, which, by the way, we will try to link to below, just mentioned that this is what the investigation is looking into. Right? Just said we're looking into the fuel switches. Now, that could mean that they're looking into the actual technical part of the fuel switches as well. So we shouldn't discard that as a possibility. But again, we're talking about an aircraft that now has a lot of flight hours,
Yeah.
right? Has been flying a lot all over the world. And these particular fuel switches are the same or very similar on several other aircraft as well. So if there would be a technical issue, something dormant, it would likely have happened before.
Yeah.
Right. It would have been reported before, and it would, you would be able to see a trend, and the chance that something one-off would happen, that could explain one engine, but not two.
No. And if it had, I think we can pretty safely say that something would have been done about it by now. There wouldn't be a global fleet flying with that potential problem. There's a good question here from Paul, actually, saying, is it something you might do, i.e. bringing the fuel control switches to cut off? Is it something you might do if you knew a crash was inevitable? And that's a good question. And the answer is it depends, in my view. Let's say if you were ditching, let's say you're landing in the sea, or you want to kind of minimize that. So yes, you might just before touchdown move them to cut off, possibly, to try and prevent any kind of ignition. But when you're crashing into a residential area,
you don't have time.
Yeah.
This takes decision making. This takes deliberate action, and it's not something we're trained to do. So
no, and it's not going to make any difference to the outcome anyway.
No,
but it's a good question.
No, definitely, yeah, absolutely. It's super interesting to see these questions. Actually, it gives an insight into what people are thinking about. But I think one of the really important points that we wanted to make with this live stream as well was that, like I said, these switches, they work. Right, they work fine. They're not. It's not something that will just happen. Like if you're out flying on a 787 one day and maybe the fuel switch jumps off. No. And hopefully that's something we have shown, that how deliberate an action it needs in order to get one of them shut down. To do two, I mean, it's a very, very deliberate action. And we even train, just to kind of drum that down even further, when we're shutting down engines on stand, we train pilots not to do both engines at the same time, so you're not subconsciously building a muscle memory of shutting down engines with two hands. Yeah. So, in the heat of the moment in flight, you don't accidentally do it. However, I just saw a comment, all right,
go on.
I'm super curious now to what you say to this. Right, so just join, so forgive if this has been said, but memory drill for double engine failure is fuel control switches both off, then on again.
Yeah. Well done. Yeah.
Done. First of all, that is an excellent point, right?
Yeah.
So that is true in case of an engine of dual engine failure.
Yeah.
So dual engine failure. The memory items includes turning both fuel switches off and then back on again, and that is to restart. To get that relight sequence going.
Yeah.
Okay.
Go on.
No, go on.
Yeah, I say the reason you might go, well, why? Why? We know that the aircraft wants to, because it has an auto relight function, which the engines will try and do the best they can if it senses that the engine does flame out. But the reason, if they have flamed out and the auto relight hasn't worked, the memory items, and I don't know if this is the same on the 7.8, I would imagine it would, because from the ground school I've done on the 7.8, it looks almost identical to the EEC on the 7.3, NG and the MAX. But what we do when you move it to cut off, what it does is it resets the engine as such. So behind the big fan you see at the front, there's loads of guide vanes that guide the airflow into the combustion chamber in the right angles and flow. And these move depending on the speed of the engine and the speed of the aircraft. And the faster you go, the more powerful the engine, the more they kind of close to get the angle right. By going to cut off first, it resets all that, opens everything up as though it's ready and primed, ready for the most successful chance of a successful engine start. So that's why we go to cut off first, but we very, very quickly move them back to idle once we see it spooling down.
But it is a super interesting point, right? Let's say, for example, that the investigation actually is looking at the fuel switches because they found them in off both of them or whatever. Like, of course, there is the odd possibility that if these are the memory items, which I'm not rated on the 787, so I can't say, but if you lose trust and you notice that you lose trust on both engines, that you do flip them off and to flip them on again as part of the memory items.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So if that's the case, then you're back to square one again. Then we have no idea.
But then we're looking at a double engine failure again, aren't we? We're back into that. Yeah,
exactly. We're back into the unexplained double engine failure at exactly the same.
and the other thing I would add to that is that we know that we don't know for sure, but from what we can see, it looks as though the gear lever was selected up. So, and then the engines failed or the electrics failed. So
maybe you can repeat why you say that.
Yeah. So in the what we looked at when we looked at the footage, we noticed that the 787, when you raise the landing gear in the 787, the bogies, they tilt. They change the tilt of the main gear so that they fit into the belly of the aircraft. So they're in a certain position, and then when you go gear up, they tilt hydraulically, and then they will retract. We saw the tilt, but we didn't see anything after that, which tells us that the engines failed just after the gear was selected up, which means it lost hydraulic power. So there's no way you'd be doing memory items that close to the ground that quickly, because the gear is the first thing. Raising the landing gear is pretty much the very first thing we do as soon as we get airborne. As soon as we see we're safely climbing away from the ground, straight away, the first thing, positive rate of climb, gear goes up. And at that point, it seems that the engines, both of them, were shut off. You wouldn't go into memory items at that point.
Again, apart from this is going into speculation. So so the only thing we wanted to touch on really again was the fact that the air current is pointing this way, the fact that several other reputable newspapers and news organizations like Reuters, for example, have picked it up. So we thought that, in all fairness to everyone who is following the channel, this is what we try to do. We try to inform whenever there is an information vacuum like we're living in right now regarding this. We try to give as much information we can without pointing fingers, right? Because anything is still on the table until the official report can actually come out and confirm something for us. And then again, we're just waiting to do a proper Mentor Now video to explain whatever we get from the official report. But, from the side of public service, basically, I want to be able to answer as many questions as possible. So let's take a few more, shall we?
Yeah, sure. And I think that going off what you said, Peter, that's the real reason we've done this now, is because we're both getting so many questions. As soon as a little bit of news comes out, even if it's unconfirmed, it's important that we just give the facts so that people can then base it on that. Let's have a look. So here, SSS Hex, can those switches, the fuel control switches, could they be moved simply by the impact force? Well, we don't know what position those switches are in yet. There's nothing official yet. This is just what we've heard the focus of the investigation is on. But the black box is the flight data recorder, where it will record all of this. It will record every single switch that we touch day to day. Everything is recorded. Yeah. So whether they're found in that position or not is kind of irrelevant, because they're going to be looking at the data that led up to that before that point anyway.
Good.
Anything you'd add to that, Peter?
No. ESB234 is asking, when will we see a preliminary report? The indications we have now is that on Friday we will likely see a preliminary report. But again, it depends on how much the investigation is willing to divulge on that. It might just be basically a 4-page report saying this is what happened on this day.
Yeah. Yeah. But we will dive into it more, obviously, as soon as anything comes out. We will. Any other questions that you can see there, Peter, that you'd like to answer?
There's so many, and I'm super amazed by the quality of some of these questions.
Yeah,
it speaks volumes about the people that are actually watching this.
Yeah. The level of kind of background knowledge you're showing is awesome. Lumber here saying, if you had a dual engine failure and the fuel was okay, what came first, the APU or the RAT? Well, the RAT. I'm not rated on the 7.8, but from what I've read up on it, the RAT would come first. That automatically deploys. The APU is more of a deliberate start attempt.
I think the APU actually auto starts.
Yeah, it does. It does on the 7.8. It does. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I don't. The answer to me is I don't know. I can look into that.
I mean, the RAT just falls out and into the slipstream, right?
Yeah.
So it will start spinning and producing electricity very, very quickly. But the APU, even if the APU is auto started, as you know, it'll take a good 20, 30 seconds or something to get up and running. Could take longer even on the 7.8, because I'm guessing it's a bigger APU than what we have.
Yeah. So the RAT for sure would be supplying power before the APU, but it's a good question.
Yeah. There was also questions. Someone just pointed out that there's a big divide between questions and statements at the moment. But someone pointed out that the hydraulics will not completely die immediately if you have a dual engine failure, which is true.
It's true.
But it also, you have to realize that there's a lot of hydraulics needed for an aircraft this size. So
Yeah.
if they lose their hydraulic sources, it will come down to the rat very quickly.
Yeah. And the biggest draws of hydraulic power are things like landing gear, flaps. So even if you those pumps run down very quickly, as soon as you try and get the gear up, which is it's not going to have enough residual pressure in there to raise an entire landing gear. But you are right. The residual pressure does stay to a certain extent.
Good. Shout out to Ramiro Vera as well from the Patreon crew. Great to see you here. Everyone from the Patreon crew, super stoked to have you here.
Absolutely. Nico. So how long would it take from the switches being turned off to losing all thrust? Pretty much instantly. Yeah.
You'd have, like, that's the thing. You wouldn't have thrust anymore. You'd have the engine spinning down, but it wouldn't produce any forward thrust. For that, you require fuel.
Yeah. And it'd be a very, very marked, noticeable event. I remember Sully describing the event when he had the double bird strike, and you've had that horrible sensation of when he was climbing away, and that sense of acceleration and climb suddenly just turning into slow and that kind of pitching forward motion and a deceleration, and he had that pit of his stomach feeling. That it's that noticeable. It's so noticeable.
Yeah,
people explain it to the other.
People tell me that that's like almost driving into a wall. Like it feels like you're decelerating.
Yeah,
and that is, I mean, because I don't think that we realize how much thrust these engines are actually producing to push us forward and to accelerate. So if that just disappears, it'll be very, very noticeable.
Yeah, for sure. So it's a good question again. Let's have a look. I can't think of anything else on here.
So Raya Raymonds is asking, do pilots go through a quick procedure before a Mayday call? Well, I mean, when it comes to Mayday calls, we always work by the principle aviate, navigate, communicate, right? And aviate includes both flying the aircraft and also doing memory items and stuff that has to do with recovery of the aircraft back to a safe state. So navigation comes after that, and then communicate, which means that a Mayday call generally is something that happens once we have everything else under control, right?
Yeah.
I guess
or desperation.
Yeah, or in desperation, exactly. And I mean, we know that there was a call from the pilots here now. I still haven't seen the correct transcript of what was said. But of course, if something happens directly after takeoff and they realize that they've lost all power, someone is likely going to give a call.
Yeah, and the other thing to bear in mind, because there's a question here from straight out of Shire. How does this contextualize the pilot's radio call and inverted commas thrust not achieved? Again, that's not confirmed, but you got to remember this is going to be a very overwhelming few seconds, and if from one single pilot's perspective, if they won't necessarily know the reason why the thrust has not been achieved, but if those fuel switches are indeed the focus of the investigation, they may not be aware as to what's happened, but that's something that's going to turn out. We'll know more hopefully on Friday.
Yeah. So I guess if you have any more questions,
I think that's it.
No, I mean, this is a little bit shorter than we normally do, but we just wanted to talk about this particular, because I know that you're going to be reading it all over the internet. You're going to be, if you're into aviation, you will have already have 5 friends sending you these articles that are out there. So I hope this has been helpful. Let us know in the comments.
Yeah.
If you're watching this on Mentor now, make sure to check out the Captain Speaking channel as well, because this is what we do there. We kind of freewheel and talk from the heart and from our experience. So it's a podcast channel, which you can also find on any place that you find podcasts. So Spotify, Acasts, everywhere.
Yeah, and we answer your questions there as well. So if you've got questions, it's a great place to go and ask them. We do look at the comments. So yeah, do get involved.
Good. Should we take up a last question here to see if we find something?
Yeah, if you've got one there, let's have a look. Let me just go through my side here. I think we've answered. There's a lot of questions I can see here that we've actually kind of similar to what we've already answered.
Yeah, so I may have heard wrong, but the survivor stated that he heard a bang. Would that be caused by the rat deploying or the engine switches being turned off? First of all, again, the engine switches is what the investigator is looking into now. So we don't know exactly that has been the cause yet. But generally speaking, it's very hard to rely on eyewitnesses, even people that has been inside of an aircraft. Like things like hearing bangs and seeing fire is something that almost all people who have been involved or seen accidents say. But very, only sometimes it's actually correct. Right? This is why eyewitness account. If you look at eyewitness accounts from almost everyone who's been outside of an aircraft who have seen it go down, people will say it was a fireball. It was on fire, always, even if that's not the case. So you have to take eyewitness account with quite a bit of salt, especially if it's someone who's not in the industry, who's not trained and doesn't know what sounds he should be expecting.
And the order in which things happen can get jumbled. The bang could have been the initial impact of the tail, but it in your mind it happened before. There's lots and lots of different things that can come into play there. One more question here from Aaron, which is a good point. It said, would it be better to always start the APU before departure and then turn it off later if you don't need it? Thoughts on that?
I'm a little bit torn on that, because I think that the impression people get partly because of the videos that I create, to be honest, and also because of these live streams, is that this is a very common occurrence. As in, like, if it was the case that sometimes engines fail, then absolutely. Then it would be a great idea to have the APU already available and then just shut it off after takeoff. But the fact is that I have gone through my entire career, 21 years of flying, without having been even close to an engine failure.
Correct.
Right? 12,000 hours or more, or something like that. I've seen plenty in the simulator, but never online. Never. The engine hasn't even been. I haven't had a surge, even when I've sucked in birds into the engines.
No,
they are incredible machines, and if you look into the cost, the environmental costs, the noise, the pollution, and the actual monetary cost of having tens of thousands of APUs running for an extra, 15, 20 minutes or whatever. It's enormous, and it's for very, very little use.
And don't forget as well that the only reason we would really need it is if we had a double engine failure.
Yeah.
Because if you've got a single engine failure, you've still got the other engine producing electricity and hydraulics and everything else. So the logic, I get, but the chance of actually needing that would be billions to one, I'm sure. Yeah.
So on that notice, we are looking forward to see what the interim report will say. Hopefully on Friday, we will then be creating a video very quickly and have it with you on Mentor Now as soon as we possibly can to give you any more information about it. If there's anything really groundbreaking, we might do another one of these live streams or an emergency podcast on Captain Speaking. But until then, I hope this has been informative. And I wish everyone a pleasant evening.
Yeah, have a good night, everybody. Thanks for all the amazing questions. And hopefully see you over on one of the podcasts. Take care.